Hey everyone, welcome to the third Sunday School lesson covering Revelation. I'm Wyatt, the Associate Youth Director at Faith UMC. This time around, we're going to get into some pretty fun stuff. When you think of the book of Revelation, you probably think of some pretty wild things, right? Like monsters and war and horses coming from the sky. Today, we're going to talk about some of these features and talk about what they represent and how they correspond to our lives today. So in the first video, I mentioned that John, the author, uses some really specific imagery in these writings. And he does this because the people at the time were familiar with these shared cultural artifacts that meant a lot to them and could be understood by a lot of people in different communities. And some of the things that John describes use metaphors or comparisons to Jewish and Roman cultural elements. So to us, it sounds strange, but to the original readers, it was creative, and it was an effective way to get a point across. So I'm sure we've all seen memes about the virus and about what life is like right now. So imagine people 2,000 years in the future finding a saved folder on your Instagram and trying to figure out like what the great toilet paper shortage of 2020 was, or why everybody came together under our leader Joe Exotic, while every history book will be completely void of his name. Like, John is basically sending memes to the churches of Asia Minor that are really relevant and have a purpose, but without context, they seem kind of strange to us, and sometimes even scary. Some of the characters in Revelation include a dragon that wants to eat a baby, a seven-headed, 10-horned monster with bare feet, a bloody lamb with 7 eyes, fire-breathing horses with lion heads. It's a great cast. And John explains a lot of these creatures according to how the angels explain them to him in these visions. And not all of them have explicit explanations, but to me it wouldn't make sense for some of these creatures to all be like predictions for the future, and then others are being explained as metaphors, like right after they're described. So if you do take this book literally, that's okay, many traditions do. But as I go forward, we're going to pay attention to John's use of imagery and comparison and try to see what he's saying about the world we live in now, rather than trying to figure out if he's talking about some event in the distant future. So Revelation 17 tells us about this part of the vision where a woman comes in riding a beast, and the beast has lots of heads and lots of horns, and we get a description of what all of these components of the part of the vision represents pretty quickly after it's described, but not everything is explained because the original readers didn't really need it explained. So I'm going to read some verses, and I want you to try to imagine, just in your mind, what John is trying to describe symbolically. Revelation chapter 17, verses 3 through 6 says something like, "Then he brought me in a spirit-inspired trance to a desert. There I saw a woman seated on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names. It had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman wore purple and scarlet clothing, and she glittered with gold and jewels and pearls. In her hand she held a gold cup full of vile and impure things. A name, a mystery, was written on her forehead: Babylon the Great, the mother of the vile things of the earth. I saw that the woman was drunk on the blood of the saints and the blood of Jesus' witnesses. I was completely stunned when I saw her." Pretty detailed description. And he then goes on to tell us how the angel explains these things. He says, the beast that was and is not and is about to come up out of the abyss and go to destruction is the 8th king, the first 7 kings being the 7 heads of the beast. And its 10 horns are 10 more kings who haven't come into power yet. And when they do come into power, they're all going to team up and give their power to the beast. And the beast will make war on the lamb. Of course, the lamb will win. But the lamb isn't the only thing the beast will fight. In fact, the same horns and beast will hate and destroy the woman riding the beast. Now, in verse 18, John writes, "The woman whom you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth." So wait, why would the kings want to destroy the great city? The lady represents evil and the beast represents evil, so shouldn't they be on the same side? So this is one of my favorite subtexts in Revelation because it's subtle enough that it's overlooked, confusing enough that it's disregarded, but it speaks so much truth to the human condition and the cycle that we get trapped in. So when he describes the woman, he's describing Rome. And he's referencing these works of art that have mostly been destroyed or lost by now, but some remain on coins. And it's of this goddess Rome called Dea Roma. And she represents kind of Rome as a whole, right? Not just the infrastructure or the city itself, but the people and the culture. And John sees water underneath her, which represents languages and cultures and people as well. So we can tell she's more than just the city. She's the essence of the society. And the beast with its 7 heads, the heads being the hills on which Rome was built, represent the leadership of Rome, both in the political sense as well as the economic sense. But John says that the beast, Rome's leaders and business people, will destroy the woman, Rome as a society. Now, I think this is incredibly accurate right off the bat. I think it was accurate then. I think it's accurate now. And before I explain, I want to make it clear that I don't want you to take this as a conspiracy video, right? That you should not trust the government and that the world is evil. That is not the point. The entire purpose of Revelation is to tell us that despite there being evil in the world, it will never overpower the good. And the message is hope and positivity. So don't get it twisted. But here's why I find this accurate. Shoes. Have you ever purchased a pair of Nikes? And were you aware of the cheap and abusive labor it took to produce those shoes, but you bought them anyway? Or maybe you were buying shoes that you thought were saving the world and doing all these good things and no harm, like Toms. I wear Toms. You know, you buy a pair and they donate a pair. How can that hurt? Well, the people receiving these shoe donations don't typically need them as much as we're told that they do. Most of these communities need basic resources like clean water and hygiene products and food. You can't eat shoes. The donations of these shoes has not been proven effective because the benefit only lasts for as long as the shoe lasts, which isn't very long. And it has an effect on the local economy too. Local businesses that make shoes can't sell any when people are getting them for free. So they close. And then as soon as the donations stop coming in, now there aren't shoe manufacturers. So the community actually does need donations. So then the community becomes dependent on donations, right? It's this cycle. Companies often try to trick you into thinking that you're doing something good by providing temporary aid to people in need. But in reality, what we're really doing is putting Band-Aids on a broken arm. It's not sustainable, and we aren't building people up to help themselves. We should focus on education and building wells, water treatment facilities, things that last. It's not the best example, but it's an example of how the world can feed off itself, how it can be trapped in a cycle, how we let problems continue by making money off temporary solutions so that the problem isn't really fixed and we can keep profiting because we have to keep contributing to giving aid. That's one way the beast attacks the writer. Sometimes businesses do some shady stuff to get more money out of your pocket. Sometimes politicians allow bad stuff to happen in order to stay in office. People feed off of other people. And I don't mean this to sound scary. I think we all realize that people have a tendency to abuse the power that they have in order to get more. Power is really addicting, and addictions take over our lives. The verse says that the kings will destroy her, but she represents the city that rules over the kings of the earth. The kings think they rule over society, but the corruption in society is actually ruling them, right? The addiction to power owns them just as much as they're trying to own society. The fight is about control and wrestling with power and attachment and ownership. And the longer it goes on, the weaker the leadership becomes. This kind of leadership eventually fails and society crumbles. When leadership obtains too much power, they have to feed off the people that they serve. Society ends up swallowing itself when we let greed and worldly attachment get the best of us. John saw this happening in the world around him, but he saw it as a pattern of human nature and not just a current event. In the first video, I said that these writings from long ago are relevant right now, and I think that's true because we can see people abandoning their spirituality for temporary attachments to the world, and it ends up causing instability and pain. We shouldn't be afraid of this because we are reassured by the message that the light won't be overtaken by the darkness. We shouldn't be afraid to fight against injustice, but we should be aware of the injustice taking place around us because if we don't stand up to it, we're just letting it happen. And that's kind of the same thing as being a part of it. The same thing that I get from this passage is the same reason I love communion so much. Communion means a lot to me because it reminds me of this truth. And this is not the typical understanding of communion. I'm speaking personally here. Of course, communion means much more than this, but to me, Jesus telling us to eat his body and drink his blood is a reminder that the world is cannibalistic. We consume each other. We remember our human nature that gives us that feeling of like,
eat or be eaten.
And then we step back and we say, no, you know what? Go ahead, take my body, take my blood. I'm a spirit temporarily inhabiting a human body, so I don't need to fall into this cannibalistic cycle. Jesus talks about ushering in this kind of reverse kingdom, right? Where everything is inverted. Instead of being leaders of human motivation who eat others to sustain their powers, we need to be leaders of spiritual motivation who willingly sacrifice ourselves to sustain the world. So after this, pray to yourself, pray with your family about having the courage to self-sacrifice, about being brave enough to be consumed rather than to consume, and about having the ability to spot these patterns of human behavior so that we don't become Babylon. Right now is a great time to practice overcoming our volatile tendencies and pushing ourselves to give instead of take. We are building the kingdom of heaven here on earth right now, guys, by our actions and our intentions. And sometimes the right action goes against our human nature. So don't give in to fear. Don't give in to greed. Don't give in to power. Don't be the beast or the rider. Be the lamb. Thanks for watching this. Leave a comment if you'd like to continue studying Revelation, or if you'd rather just start from the top and take it all back to Genesis. Choose your own adventure. Once the doors open up again, I hope you'll join us at Faith UMC in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Until next time, peace.